She is the unstable one in this family. My sister screamed those words as the police officers pulled my arms behind my back and locked the cold metal handcuffs around my wrists. For 20 years, the golden child lied, and our parents swallowed every single word. I did not shout in that crowded ballroom. I did not cry. I just looked at the arresting officer and asked him to open the trunk of my car. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family and had to fight your way out. My name is Melanie. I am 33 years old and I work as a forensic accountant at one of the top financial investigation firms in Chicago. My entire career is built on a single unshakable foundation. Numbers do not lie even when people do. My job literally involves tearing through encrypted ledgers, tracing stolen corporate money, uncovering massive financial fraud, and finding the truth buried under layers of desperate deception. You would think my family might remember what I do for a living before trying to frame me for a felony. But arrogance has a way of making people blind to their own impending ruin. The annual Hope Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of my parents' social calendar. Richard and Patricia spent months orchestrating this night at the Downtown Plaza Hotel, ensuring the champagne flowed freely, and the wealthy donors felt generous enough to keep their checkbooks wide open. I hated these events. I hated the fake smiles and the hollow conversations. I only attended tonight because my mother texted me that morning claiming they wanted to publicly recognize my recent promotion at the firm. A peace offering, she called it. She promised things would be different this time. I should have known better than to believe a sudden display of parental warmth. I was standing near the towering ice sculpture, wearing a formal black gown, sipping sparkling water. Then the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open violently. Two uniformed police officers marched straight toward me, their faces completely stern. The live string quartet stopped playing instantly. Conversations died in an awkward, echoing silence. Hundreds of elite guests turned their heads as the officers reached me, grabbed my arms without a word of warning, and snapped the handcuffs shut. The cold steel biting into my skin was sharp, real, and completely humiliating. My sister Brittany pushed her way to the front of the stunned crowd. At 30 years old, she was the director of the family charity, a title our parents had handed her the moment she graduated with a communications degree she barely earned. Brittany collapsed against our mother, burying her face in Patricia's silk wrap, sobbing with theatrical perfection. "She took it," Brittany wailed, pointing a trembling manicured finger at me. I could not believe it when I saw the bank statements. She stole $100,000 from the Orphans Fund to pay off her gambling debts. She is the unstable one in this family. Patricia wrapped her arms tightly around Brittany, stroking her blonde hair. "It is okay, sweetie," Patricia cooed, pitching her voice loudly enough for the major donors and local politicians to hear. "We caught her. We are putting a stop to this nightmare right now." I scanned the sea of horrified faces. I saw Elijah, Brittany's husband, standing near the catering staff. Elijah was a brilliant, hardworking African-American architect, a man who actually earned his success through late nights and pure grit. Elijah looked completely bewildered, his dark eyes darting between me and his crying wife. He took a step forward to intervene, opening his mouth to speak, but Patricia shot him a venomous glare that froze him in place. "Do not defend a thief, Elijah," Patricia snapped harshly. Brittany sobbed louder, clinging to our mother. "She forged my signature," Brittany cried out to the room. "I trusted her to audit the charity accounts, and she used her access to wire the money to an offshore betting ring. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She hit all the right buzzwords to make the wealthy donors view me as an absolute monster." My father Richard puffed out his chest, stepping squarely into my personal space. The smell of his expensive scotch and musky cologne made my stomach turn. "You are an absolute disgrace to this family," he hissed. His face was a mask of righteous fury for the audience, but I could see the familiar cold calculation in his eyes. He was enjoying this control. "You have always been a manipulative liar, just like when you ruined our Aspen trip at 16 by pretending to be sick just to get attention. You are sick, Melanie, and you are going to prison." That Aspen remark was their favorite weapon. When I was 16, my appendix burst 2 days before their luxury ski vacation. I was curled on the bathroom floor in agony, begging them to take me to the emergency room. Richard told me to stop faking it because I was jealous that Brittany got new snowboarding gear, and I got nothing. I ended up calling an ambulance for myself. I underwent emergency surgery, nearly dying from sepsis, while they boarded their first-class flight to Colorado anyway. They left me alone in the intensive care unit. To cover their guilt, they spent the next decade telling their country club friends that I had a severe psychiatric episode meant to sabotage their holiday. If reality made them look negligent, they simply rewrote it and made me the villain. They expected me to break down right here, to scream and cry and look exactly like the unhinged woman they were painting me to be. Instead, I looked at the older police officer. His grip on my arm was firm, his expression rigid. He started reciting my rights, his deep voice carrying over the dead silent ballroom. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I did not struggle. I did not beg for mercy. I stood completely still, my posture straight, holding my head high as I stared directly into my father's smug eyes. "Officer!" I said, my voice carrying a calm, chilling authority that made Richard flinch backward. "Before we take the ride down to the precinct, I need you to do something for me." The officer stopped reciting. He exchanged a puzzled look with his partner. Usually, people accused of stealing six figures were a sobbing, defensive mess. "What are you talking about, ma'am?" he asked. "My car is parked in the VIP lot, space number 12. It is a silver sedan. My keys are in the black clutch sitting on that cocktail table." I nodded toward the glass table beside me. "I need you to open my trunk." Underneath the spare tire compartment, there is a thick red leather folder. I have been keeping it updated since I was 12 years old. I highly suggest you bring it to the interrogation room tonight. It is going to save your financial crimes unit a massive amount of paperwork. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee, anxiety, and harsh industrial cleaner. The walls were a sickly shade of gray, meant to break down resolve and encourage confessions. Detective Miller sat across from me, his sleeves rolled up, a weary look in his eyes. He had placed my red folder on the metal table between us unopened. I had refused to speak further until he fetched it from the trunk of my car, and to his credit, he had listened. He was waiting, but not for my lawyer. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. My mother, Patricia, walked in. She did not look like a frantic parent whose daughter had just been paraded out of a charity gala in handcuffs. She looked like she was arriving to terminate a subordinate at a corporate board meeting. Her designer coat was perfectly draped over her shoulders, her hair immaculate, her expression forged from hardened steel. Beside her stood Arthur Vance, our family corporate attorney, clutching a thick manila envelope. I looked behind them, expecting a bail bondsman. There was no one else. No tears of concern, no frantic questions about my well-being. Just Arthur and his expensive briefcase. Patricia sat down across from me, ignoring Detective Miller completely. She slid the manila envelope across the scratched metal table. "Sign it, Melanie," she commanded, her voice dropping to that icy, authoritative register she used when she expected absolute obedience. Arthur pulled a sleek silver pen from his pocket and placed it precisely on the signature line of the document. "What is this?" I asked, not moving my hands from my lap. "It is a plea agreement." Arthur interjected, his tone slick and condescending. "I have already had a preliminary discussion with the district attorney. You admit to the embezzlement, you agree to a structured repayment plan for the $100,000, and you get 5 years of probation. No jail time, Melanie. It is an incredibly generous deal. We are keeping this quiet to protect the charity." I stared at him, then shifted my gaze to my mother. "You want me to confess to a felony I did not commit? I want you to stop being selfish for once in your life," Patricia snapped, pinching the bridge of her nose as if dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Brittany is trying for a baby right now, Melanie. Her stress levels are already dangerously high. She cannot handle a police investigation, let alone a public trial. You are single. You have no dependents. Your forensic accounting career is a dead end anyway. Take the fall for your sister. We have always had to clean up your messes, like when we had to pay your landlord after you missed rent in college." I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the cold metal press into my palms. "You paid my rent once because you legally drained my college savings account to buy Brittany her first Mercedes. You told me it was a loan. You told me family helps family. You owe this family," Patricia hissed, leaning closer, her eyes flashing with venom. "We gave you everything. The least you can do is protect your sister's future. Sign the paper." I did not reach for Arthur's pen. I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear. I just turned my attention to the detective who was watching this bizarre family dynamic play out with quiet fascination. "Detective Miller," I said calmly, breaking my silence with him. "Please open the red folder to the first tab. It is labeled Offshore Transfers." Miller glanced at Patricia, then reached for the heavy leather binder. He flipped the cover open. Inside, meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and color-coded, were pages of banking logs, encrypted network analytics, and transaction receipts. "Pull out the IP trace report from October 4th, I instructed, leaning back in my chair. "That is the exact date the $100,000 was wired out of the Charity Orphans Fund." Miller pulled out a highlighted spreadsheet, his eyes scanning the dense columns of data. "The transfer was authorized from an IP address originating in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico," I said, keeping my eyes locked dead on Patricia. "The transaction took place at exactly 2 in the afternoon Central Time. Now turn to the next page." Miller turned the page. "It is a certified time-stamped screenshot of my sister's public social media account," I explained. "It shows a geo-tagged photo of Brittany and my mother sipping margaritas on a private luxury balcony in Cabo San Lucas on October 4th at 2 in the afternoon." Patricia's face instantly drained of color. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by a rigid mask of panic. Her perfect posture faltered as Detective Miller placed the vacation photos side by side with the bank security logs, tracing the matching dates with his index finger. And just to be completely thorough, I continued reaching into my jacket pocket. I pulled out my work keycard and dropped it onto the table with a sharp clack. The third page in that section is a sworn notarized affidavit from my forensic accounting firm's security director. It definitively proves my badge swiped into our secure Chicago office building at 7 in the morning on October 4th. It also shows I logged into the internal server and did not leave the building until 8 at night. I was thousands of miles away from the device that stole that charity money, but my sister and my mother were sitting right on top of it. Detective Miller slowly looked up from the documents. He did not say a word, but he raised a single highly skeptical eyebrow at Arthur Vance. Arthur swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. He instinctively reached out and pulled his plea agreement back across the table, sliding it quickly into his briefcase. He was a corporate lawyer, not a fool. He knew exactly what an ironclad digital alibi meant, and he knew his clients had just tried to coerce a false confession in front of a police officer. Patricia realized she was losing control of the narrative. Her manicured hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. She leaned toward me, abandoning all pretense of maternal concern, her voice trembling with raw malice. "You ungrateful wretch!" she spat, her eyes wild. "I will destroy you for this. I will call the state board tomorrow morning and have your CPA license permanently revoked. I will tell them you stole confidential client data to fabricate this garbage. I will make sure you never work in the financial sector again. You will be ruined, Melanie." I leaned forward, mirroring her aggressive posture, but my expression remained perfectly composed. My smile was ice cold as I looked right through her. "Go ahead, Mom. Call the board. Ruin me. But before you pick up the phone, let us see what Elijah has to say when he finds out where the seed money for his architecture startup really came from." Detective Miller stared at my mother, the silence in the interrogation room suddenly deafening. He did not need to be a financial expert to recognize the smell of a cornered rat. He picked up my keycard, looked at the time-stamped Mexican resort photos, and then pointed straight at the heavy steel door. He told Patricia and her overpriced lawyer to get out of his precinct before he charged them both with obstruction of justice. They scrambled out without another word, Arthur clutching his useless plea deal tightly to his chest. Because the digital paper trail was entirely in my favor, Detective Miller processed my release on my own recognizance. He kept the red folder as evidence, but I had already anticipated that. What I handed him was only Volume 1. The raw encrypted hard drives detailing a decade of our family charity's fraudulent tax returns were hidden exactly where Richard would never think to look. I walked out of the precinct into the biting Chicago wind and hailed a cab. I needed to get back to my apartment, pack a bag, and retrieve the backup drives. My parents had vast resources, judges in their pockets, and a desperate need to silence me. I knew the retaliation would be swift. I just did not realize how brazen Richard would be. The moment I stepped off the elevator on my floor, I knew something was wrong. My heavy front door was slightly ajar, the deadbolt completely splintered from the frame. I pushed it open and stepped into a war zone. My apartment had been systematically and violently tossed. The leather cushions of my sofa were slashed open, white stuffing spilling onto the rug. Every book had been ripped from the shelves, their pages torn and scattered. My mattress was overturned, the kitchen cabinets emptied, and my desktop computer smashed to pieces against the brick wall. They were searching for the backups. They were looking for the rest of my evidence. In the center of the living room, resting perfectly across the shattered glass of my coffee table, was a single golf club, a custom-engraved Titleist 9 iron. It was Richard's favorite club. He had not left it behind by accident. It was a calculated message, a physical manifestation of his dominance. He was telling me that he could reach into my private sanctuary, destroy everything I owned, and walk away untouched. I did not waste time calling the police. Richard played golf with the police commissioner every Sunday. Filing a burglary report would just give them a documented timeline of my movements. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, threw in whatever intact clothes I could find, and left the apartment. I needed cash immediately. If I was going to fight a multi-million-dollar family empire, I needed liquid assets to stay off their radar. I walked 6 blocks to my local bank branch, keeping my head down. I approached the teller window and asked to withdraw the entirety of my emergency savings account. The teller typed my account number into her terminal, then paused. A deep, uncomfortable frown settled over her face. She called her manager, who approached the glass and looked at me with a mixture of pity and extreme caution. "I am sorry, Melanie," the manager said, lowering his voice. "We cannot authorize any withdrawals. Your accounts have been completely frozen." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. On what authority? I demanded. "There are no liens against my name. I have not been convicted of a crime." The manager slid a scanned document across the marble counter. "Your father, Richard, came into the main branch early this morning," he explained softly. "He presented a legally binding medical power of attorney. He informed our legal department that you are currently suffering a severe psychiatric episode and are a danger to yourself and your finances. We had no choice but to lock the accounts for your own protection." I looked down at the document. The date stamped at the top was 15 years old. It was signed on the exact day of my 18th birthday. A wave of nauseating memory hit me. When I was 18, I caught Brittany buying stolen answer keys for her college entrance exams. I had gathered the proof and threatened to take it straight to the high school principal. Instead of punishing Brittany, Richard and Patricia had dragged me to a private, highly discreet psychiatric clinic run by a doctor who owed my father a massive favor. They cornered me in a sterile white room, threatening to have me involuntarily committed to a locked ward if I did not sign a stack of blank medical proxy forms. They told the family I was a delusional, jealous liar having a mental breakdown. They broke me down until I signed my rights away just to escape that clinic. Richard had kept those forms in a safe for 15 years, weaponizing them the second I posed a threat. He was cutting off my oxygen, leaving me penniless and discredited. I left the bank and walked to a nearby diner. I used the last $20 bill in my coat pocket to buy a coffee and borrow the waitress's personal laptop, promising her a massive tip if she gave me 30 minutes of internet access. I am a forensic accountant. Freezing my checking account is child's play compared to the digital fortresses I dismantle for a living. I opened a secure browser window and bypassed the bank's standard portal, tapping directly into the commercial routing networks I use to audit massive corporations. I did not care about my frozen checking account. I cared about the $100,000 my sister had just stolen. If my family wanted to play dirty, I was going to find out exactly where they hid the money. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the digital fingerprints left by the Mexican IP address. The charity funds had not gone to a casino. They had not gone to a bookie to pay off Brittany's gambling debts. The money had been deliberately washed through a Cayman shell corporation to scrub the origin address. I tracked the routing numbers, bypassing 2 more dummy accounts before the money finally landed in a domestic commercial bank. I pulled up the destination ledger and stared at the screen, my blood running cold. The entire $100,000 was sitting squarely in the corporate operating account of Vanguard Architecture. That was Elijah's firm. Brittany's hard-working, strictly honest husband. I clicked on the transaction details. In the memo line typed clearly by whoever authorized the transfer were 2 words: Angel Investor. Elijah had no idea his wife was a thief. He thought he had just received legitimate funding to save his struggling startup. My parents had not just stolen the money, they had deliberately framed the only decent man in our family, turning Elijah into the perfect unwitting accomplice. I stared at the diner waitress laptop screen, the glowing letters burning the truth into my retinas. Angel Investor. My parents had not just stolen the money. They had deliberately framed the only decent man in our family, turning Elijah into the perfect unwitting accomplice. I printed the routing documents using the diner's small back-office printer, handed the waitress her promised tip from the last of my cash, and walked out into the freezing Chicago morning. I had no car, no credit cards, and no home to return to, but I had the one thing my family always underestimated. I had the facts. I flagged down a city cab, bargaining with the driver to take my designer watch as collateral for the fare. He eyed the heavy gold timepiece, shrugged, and unlocked the doors. I gave him the address of the downtown high-rise development Vanguard Architecture had recently won the bid to design. It was Elijah Masterwork, a sustainable commercial building that was supposed to put his startup on the map. Instead, it was about to become his crime scene. When the cab dropped me off at the active construction zone, the noise of jackhammers and diesel engines was deafening. I slipped a bright yellow hard hat off a supply rack and walked past the security fencing. I spotted Elijah immediately. He was standing near the foundation trenches, a rolled-up set of blueprints under his arm, deep in conversation with the site foreman. Elijah was a man who commanded respect through quiet competence. He was brilliant, grounded, and fiercely protective of his wife. That loyalty was exactly what Brittany was counting on to send him to federal prison. I approached him just as the foreman walked away. Elijah turned, his dark eyes widening in shock when he saw me standing there in my ruined gala dress and a borrowed oversized coat. "Melanie," he said, his voice tense and defensive. "What are you doing here? You need to leave right now." I stepped closer, ignoring the hostility radiating from him. "I need 5 minutes of your time, Elijah. It is a matter of life and death for your business." He shook his head, holding up a hand to block my path. "Brittany already called me this morning. She was crying hysterically. She warned me you were having an episode, Melanie. She told me about the police, about the charity money, and about how you lost your mind at the gala. She said you might try to drag us into your delusions. I am not doing this with you. Leave us alone before I call site security." I did not raise my voice. I did not act frantic or defensive. I knew exactly how my family had conditioned him to see me. I just reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the stack of freshly printed banking documents, and slammed them down on the hood of his dusty pickup truck. "I am not having an episode," I said, my voice steady and cold enough to cut through the noise of the construction site. "Look at the papers, Elijah. Look at the routing numbers. I highlighted them in yellow so you would not miss them." He glared at me, refusing to look down. "I am not playing your games, Melanie." I tapped the top sheet with my index finger. "Brittany stole $100,000 from the Orphans Fund yesterday. She washed it through a Cayman's shell corporation. Then she wired it directly into the Vanguard Architecture operating account under the guise of an anonymous angel investor. She used your startup to launder stolen charity money." Elijah froze. The absolute certainty in my voice made his professional instincts kick in. He looked down at the papers. He recognized his own business account numbers instantly. His broad shoulders stiffened, but his fierce loyalty to my sister fought back against the glaring evidence. "This is fabricated," he snapped, his voice rising. "Brittany would never do this to me. She loves me. She believes in this company. You are trying to frame her because you are jealous." "She does not love you, Elijah," I fired back, stepping into his space. "She is using you as a human shield. Think about it. Think about every Sunday dinner at the mansion. Think about how Richard looks at you. He does not see a brilliant architect. He sees a convenient scapegoat." Elijah clamped his jaw shut, looking away, but I knew I had hit a nerve. I pressed harder. "Remember Thanksgiving last year?" I asked, forcing him to face reality. "Remember when Richard stood up at the head of the table and made that toast? He said he was so glad our charity could uplift your little business, like you were some charity case he adopted from the South Side instead of a man who graduated top of his class at Cornell." Remember how Patricia always clutches her purse a little tighter whenever your cousins come over for holiday visits? They despise you because of your race and your background. They have never accepted you. You were chosen. Elijah stared at me, his chest heaving as the painful truth he had tried to ignore for years finally crashed over him. I pointed to the documents on the truck. Who are the federal agents going to believe Elijah? A wealthy, politically connected white family from the Gold Coast, or a black man whose struggling architecture firm suddenly received a massive influx of untraceable cash? The police will not even look twice. They will arrest you, they will seize your company, and Brittany will play the tragic betrayed wife for the cameras. You are the perfect fall guy. The defense mechanisms in his eyes shattered. The absolute logic of the trap they had set for him was undeniable. Without saying a word, Elijah reached into his heavy work jacket and pulled out his tablet. He placed it on the hood of the truck next to my printouts. His hands were shaking slightly as he typed in his secure administrative password, bypassing the standard accounting dashboard to access the raw server logs of his business. He navigated to the incoming wire transfers, applying a filter for the routing code I had circled on the printouts. The screen loaded. A long, dense list of transactions populated the display. Elijah leaned over the hood of the truck. All the color drained from his face. The noise of the construction site seemed to fade into a vacuum of total silence as he stared at the screen. Melanie. He breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his expression a mixture of sheer terror and complete devastation. It is not just $100,000. There are weekly deposits of $10,000 going back 3 years. Elijah stood completely paralyzed in the dust of the construction site. The crushing weight of the revelation settled over him, suffocating and absolute. He was staring at over $1.5 million in stolen funds, systematically funneled into his life's work over the course of 36 months. He did not say another word. He just closed the tablet, his hands gripping the edges so tightly his knuckles turned white, and walked blindly back toward the foundation trenches. I let him go. I had planted the seed of truth, and I knew a man like Elijah would not rest until he unearthed the entire rotten root. But I also knew my sister. Brittany would never simply wait for the hammer to fall. If she sensed she was losing control of her husband, she would lash out at the source. 48 hours later, her retaliation arrived. I was sitting at a corner table in my favorite downtown coffee shop, reviewing a digital copy of the Vanguard Architecture Ledger on my laptop. A man in a cheap windbreaker walked directly up to my table. He did not ask for my name. He just dropped a stack of legal documents, nearly 3 inches thick, right on top of my keyboard. "Melanie, consider yourself served," he said flatly, turning on his heel and walking out before I could even blink. I moved my coffee cup and pulled the heavy stack toward me. The cover page was emblazoned with the imposing seal of Arthur Vance's law firm. It was a massive civil lawsuit. Brittany and the Hope Foundation were suing me for corporate espionage, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty. They were seeking $10 million in damages. It was a classic intimidation tactic, a lawsuit designed to bury me in legal fees, drain my already frozen resources, and tie me up in court for years. They wanted to force me into a settlement where I would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement and hand over all my evidence. They moved with terrifying speed. Less than 4 days after I was served in the coffee shop, I found myself sitting in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom in the Cook County Courthouse for an emergency preliminary hearing. Arthur Vance stood at the plaintiff's table, flanked by my father and Brittany. My sister was wearing a modest, high-necked floral dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue to play the role of the traumatized victim for the judge. I sat alone at the defense table. "Your Honor!" Arthur boomed, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "We are filing an emergency injunction to protect the integrity of the Hope Foundation. The defendant, Melanie, is a disgruntled former auditor who utilized her high-level security clearance to illegally download proprietary family secrets, donor registries, and highly confidential financial projections. She is currently using this stolen data to harass and extort my clients. We respectfully demand that the court immediately confiscate all of her work devices, personal laptops, and a specific physical ledger she refers to as the red folder." The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, peered over her glasses. Those are severe allegations, counselor. Do you have testimony to support this emergency confiscation? Arthur stepped aside. We do, Your Honor. I call Richard to the stand. My father stood up, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket, and strode confidently to the witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and then turned his gaze directly toward me. There was no fatherly warmth in his eyes, only the cold, calculating glare of a CEO eliminating a corporate threat. Richard Arthur began smoothly. Can you explain to the court why your daughter would attempt to steal from the family charity and defame her own sister? My father sighed heavily, running a hand through his silver hair. He looked at the judge with a masterful display of paternal sorrow. It breaks my heart to say this, Your Honor, but Melanie has suffered from severe jealousy issues her entire life. She is a deeply unhappy, disgruntled woman. She is 33 years old, entirely alone, and frankly a bitter spinster. She has never been able to secure a husband or build a family of her own. He paused, letting the cruel insult hang in the dead air of the courtroom. Brittany, on the other hand, is perfect. Richard continued, his voice swelling with manufactured pride. She is happily married to a wonderful architect. She runs our charity with grace. She is everything Melanie is not. Melanie could not stand watching her younger sister succeed while her own forensic accounting career stalled out into a dead end. This entire espionage plot is nothing but a desperate, pathetic attempt by a lonely woman to destroy the happiness she could never achieve for herself. She wants to tear down Brittany's life, and she is using stolen charity data to do it. She is unstable, Your Honor. If you do not confiscate those files today, she will leak proprietary information out of pure vindictive spite. It was the same tactic they used when I was 16 in the hospital with a burst appendix, and when I was 18 reporting Brittany's academic cheating. If I exposed their corruption, they immediately attacked my mental stability and my personal life. They reduced me to a hysterical, jealous woman to invalidate my voice. The judge absorbed Richard's testimony. She looked at Brittany, who was now weeping softly into her hands, playing the flawless, persecuted angel to absolute perfection. Then the judge looked at me, sitting alone at the defense table. The court recognizes the immediate risk to the charitable foundation's proprietary data, the judge announced, striking her gavel. Pending a full evidentiary hearing, I am granting the emergency injunction. The defendant will surrender all electronic devices and the physical folder in question to the court bailiff immediately. Arthur Vance smiled a slick, victorious grin. Richard puffed out his chest, stepping down from the witness stand. Brittany lowered her tissue, her eyes locking onto mine with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of my weapons and silenced me forever. The armed bailiff approached my table, holding out a large plastic evidence bin. I did not argue. I did not raise an objection or show a single ounce of the hysteria my father had just described under oath. I calmly reached down into my leather tote bag and pulled out my silver laptop. I placed it gently into the bailiff's plastic bin. Then I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket, and began walking toward the courtroom exit. As I passed the plaintiff's table, I paused right behind my father's chair. I leaned down, bringing my mouth just inches from his ear. I hope you enjoy my laptop, I whispered, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal certainty that made Richard freeze instantly. It is the decoy. The real data was just emailed to the IRS whistleblower division. The color instantly drained from Richard's face. He stood frozen in the aisle of the courtroom as the armed bailiff carried my decoy laptop away. I did not stay to watch him panic. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and walked out into the crisp Chicago air. I had warned them. I had given them every opportunity to drop this charade. But my family was too arrogant and too deeply committed to their own lies to back down. They genuinely believed that forcing me into a grueling legal battle would break my spirit. They thought their vast resources could drain my remaining funds and crush me into submission. They were wrong. 6 weeks later, I found myself sitting inside the suffocating, windowless conference room of Arthur Vance's downtown law firm. We were gathered for a court-mandated deposition in the civil lawsuit. For 6 agonizing hours, Arthur had been grilling me relentlessly. The air conditioning was broken, the room smelled of stale coffee and aggressive cologne, and the sheer exhaustion was meant to be a weapon. Patricia and Brittany sat across the long mahogany table whispering to each other and openly laughing whenever Arthur asked a particularly demeaning question. Richard sat beside them, his arms crossed, his posture radiating absolute superiority. They were trying to wear me down emotionally. They wanted me to snap on camera to look like the unhinged, jealous sister they claimed I was under oath. Patricia leaned across the polished table, her eyes glittering with undisguised malice. "You are dragging this out because you cannot admit you failed, Melanie." She sneered, not caring that the video camera was recording her every word. "You have spent your whole life doing glorified bookkeeping. You count other people's money because you do not have the talent to make any of your own. You are pathetic. Just confess so we can all move forward." I let her words wash over me. I did not react. I simply stared at my sister. Brittany was wearing a smug, victorious smile, completely convinced that she had outsmarted me. Because I was representing myself pro se, I had the legal right to question the plaintiffs on the record. I looked at the court reporter, ensuring her hands were hovering over the stenograph machine. Then I turned my attention fully to Brittany. "Let us talk about the missing $100,000, I said calmly, shifting the trajectory of the deposition. "Since you are the director of the Hope Foundation, you authorized the final transfer. Under oath, Brittany, where exactly did that money go?" Arthur Vance opened his mouth to object, but Brittany waved him off. She wanted to deliver the killing blow herself. She leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial innocence. "As I have stated repeatedly, the money went to a legitimate vendor. We hired RV Contracting to handle the renovations for the annual charity gala. The invoices are all perfectly documented. They provided catering upgrades and structural staging. It was a standard corporate expense." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch out in the room. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick red binder. It was an exact duplicate of the folder they thought the judge had confiscated during the preliminary hearing. Patricia gasped loudly, her hand flying to her throat. Arthur Vance sat up straight, his face suddenly slick with nervous sweat. "RV Contracting." I repeated, flipping to page 2 of my duplicate folder. I slid a certified state corporate registry document across the table. "It is fascinating that you hired them for staging and catering. According to the state of Illinois, RV Contracting is a limited liability company registered to your home address, Brittany. And the named CEO of this company is Roxy Vance." Brittany's smug smile vanished instantly. She looked at Arthur, sheer panic flaring in her eyes. I did not stop. "For the record," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly to the court reporter and the camera. "Roxy Vance is your purebred golden retriever. You used your pet dog to register a shell company. You just committed perjury on a recorded deposition, Brittany." Arthur slammed both hands on the table. "I object. This is irrelevant and completely fabricated. My client will not answer these ridiculous accusations." "It is highly relevant," I shot back, sliding another stack of bank statements across the polished wood. "Because RV Contracting did not pay for gala renovations. The account ledger shows that every single dollar of that $100,000 was immediately wired to the Bellagio Casino in Las Vegas. It went directly into a private VIP account to cover Mom's secret high-stakes poker debts." Patricia let out a strangled, horrified cry. The entire room erupted into chaos. My mother's pristine reputation, her carefully curated image of upper-class perfection, was suddenly exposed as a massive gambling-addicted fraud. She had been bleeding the family charity dry to feed her severe gambling addiction, and she had used my sister to do it. Then they had both tried to frame me, and later Elijah, to cover their tracks. Arthur Vance shot out of his chair, his face completely pale. He pointed a trembling finger at the court reporter. "Stop typing. Off the record. We are taking an immediate recess." He scrambled to gather his papers, stuffing them into his briefcase. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a live landmine. "We are done here for today." I stood up and walked calmly over to the heavy glass conference room doors. I grasped the metal handles and pushed the security lock mechanism until it clicked loudly into place. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the panicked room. "No breaks," I said, turning back to face my horrified family. "We are not going anywhere." Arthur glared at me, his chest heaving with exertion. "You cannot lock us in here, Melanie. That is unlawful imprisonment. Open that door right now, or I will have my paralegal call the police." I smiled a cold, predatory grin and nodded toward the quiet man sitting in the corner of the room. He had been there for all 6 hours, typing diligently on a laptop entirely ignored by Arthur, Patricia, and Brittany. They had assumed he was just another member of Arthur's extensive legal support staff. "You do not need to call the police." "Arthur?" I whispered, watching the blood drain completely from my father's face, as the reality of their destruction finally hit him. "Because the man sitting quietly in the corner taking notes is not your paralegal. He is Special Agent Davis from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit." Special Agent Davis stood up from his small corner desk, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a gold badge, letting it catch the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room. Arthur Vance collapsed backward into his leather chair, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Patricia buried her face in her hands, letting out a sharp, guttural wail. Brittany looked like she was going to be sick. I did not wait to watch the federal agents begin reading them their rights. I unlocked the heavy glass doors, stepped out into the hallway, and left my family to drown in the exact trap they had built for me. Across town, the shockwaves of the collapsing empire had already reached the upscale penthouse loft Brittany shared with her husband. Elijah stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The luxury apartment with its imported Italian marble and custom lighting suddenly felt like a beautifully decorated prison cell. He held the printed ledger documents I had given him at the construction site, his thumb tracing the highlighted routing numbers. Every transaction, every hidden deposit, every Cayman's wire transfer was a nail in his coffin. The front door of the loft slammed open. Brittany marched inside, her designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood. Her face was flushed, her breath coming in ragged gasps after fleeing the disastrous deposition. She threw her expensive purse onto the kitchen island and began pacing the length of the living room, completely ignoring him. Elijah stepped away from the window. "We need to talk, Brittany." She spun around, her eyes wild and aggressive. "Not now, Elijah. My psychotic sister just ambushed us with federal agents. I need to call my father and his crisis management team before this hits the evening news." Elijah walked to the kitchen island and dropped the Vanguard architecture ledgers directly next to her purse. "We are going to talk right now," he said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register. I checked the server logs, Brittany. I bypassed the dashboard and looked at the raw incoming wires. Melanie was telling the truth. "You washed $1.5 million of stolen charity money through my company. You used my startup to launder stolen funds." Brittany stared at the papers. For a fraction of a second, the panic in her eyes was replaced by cold, calculating assessment. The weeping, victimized wife routine she had played for the judge was entirely gone. She crossed her arms, her posture shifting from defensive to dominant. "And what if I did?" She challenged, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You needed capital to keep Vanguard afloat. I found a creative way to provide it. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you!" Elijah echoed, his broad shoulders tensing as the sheer audacity of her statement hit him. "You committed federal wire fraud. You stole from an orphan charity fund managed by your own family, and you funneled the cash into accounts bearing my name. You made me an unwitting accomplice to a federal crime." Brittany let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, please, Elijah, spare me the righteous indignation. You gladly spent that money to buy your high-end drafting software and pay your structural contractors. You are just as guilty as I am." "I did not know the money was stolen," he fired back, stepping closer to her. "I thought we secured an anonymous angel investor. That is what you and Richard told me." She tilted her head, her gaze sweeping over him with profound disgust. "It does not matter what you thought. It only matters what the paper trail shows. And the paper trail shows that Vanguard Architecture, a company registered solely in your name, received $1.5 million in stolen funds." Elijah froze. The absolute certainty in her voice made his stomach plummet. Melanie's warning at the construction site echoed loudly in his mind. "She is using you as a human shield." "You set me up," he breathed, the horrific realization finally crashing over him. "This was the plan all along." Brittany stepped into his space, pointing a manicured finger hard against his chest. "Let us be very clear about how this is going to play out if you decide to turn on me. Who are the police going to believe, Elijah? Are they going to believe a wealthy, politically connected white family from the Gold Coast, who generously donated their time to charity? Or are they going to believe a black man from the South Side whose failing business was suddenly flooded with stolen money? Elijah stared at his wife, the woman he had vowed to protect, realizing he had never actually known her at all. She was not a supportive partner. She was a predator. You will go to prison. Not me, Brittany sneered, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. The prosecutors will look at your background. They will look at my family and our donor history to the police union, and they will arrest you before dinner time. You are the perfect criminal. You are exactly what juries expect to see sitting at the defense table. The final puzzle pieces slammed into place. Elijah remembered the day he registered the LLC for Vanguard Architecture. Richard had insisted on paying the legal filing fees, explicitly advising Elijah to keep Brittany's name off the incorporation documents to protect her trust fund from potential business liability. He remembered the Thanksgiving dinner toast, the way Richard had patted his back and called him a charity case. He remembered the quiet, condescending looks from Patricia whenever he entered their mansion. They never saw him as a son-in-law. They saw him as a perfectly profiled scapegoat. They had cultivated him, financed him, and married him off to their daughter for this exact slaughter. I am your husband, Elijah said, his voice stripped of all emotion. You are collateral damage, Brittany corrected coldly. You are going to take the fall for this, Elijah. You are going to sign a full confession taking sole responsibility for the embezzlement. If you do exactly as I say, my father will hire a decent lawyer to negotiate a plea deal. You will do 5 years in minimum security. If you fight me, I will make sure the narrative paints you as a predatory scam artist who manipulated my family and stole from orphans. You will never see the outside of a federal penitentiary again. Elijah did not yell. He did not break down or beg for mercy. He simply stared at her, absorbing the absolute depth of her depravity. I have to go meet with Arthur Vance, Brittany snapped, grabbing her purse off the counter and marching toward the front door. Do not leave this apartment. Do not call anyone. Just sit here and think very carefully about your future. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. Elijah stood alone in the silence of the massive loft. He let out a long, slow breath, steadying his racing heart. He turned and walked over to the kitchen counter. He reached underneath the polished marble overhang, his fingers brushing against a small shelf he had installed months ago to hold a spare set of keys. He pulled out his smartphone. The screen was illuminated, displaying an active voice recording application. The timer showed 22 minutes of continuous recording. He tapped the red square, stopping the capture. He had recorded the entire racist, threatening confession. Every single word of Brittany, outlining the extortion, the fraud, and her explicit plan to frame him for federal crimes, was saved in crystal-clear, high-definition audio. Elijah did not hesitate. He opened his messaging app, attached the audio file, and selected my contact name. He hit send, watching the progress bar fill until the message displayed as delivered. He had the facts, and now so did I. The audio file chimed on my phone just as I returned to my desk at the forensic accounting firm. I pressed play, listening through my headphones to the crystal-clear recording of Brittany threatening her own husband. Elijah had captured every single second of her venomous rant. I heard my sister explicitly outline the extortion, the wire fraud, and her calculated plan to frame a black man from the South Side to protect our wealthy, connected family. It was the ultimate smoking gun. I immediately uploaded the audio file to 3 separate encrypted offshore servers, forwarding a direct copy to Special Agent Davis. The final piece of the trap was firmly in place. Before I could even process the magnitude of the evidence I had just secured, a violent crash echoed down the main corridor. I stood up from my workstation and stepped out into the glass-walled hallway of the firm. Richard and Patricia were bulldozing their way past our terrified front desk receptionist. My father was practically vibrating with rage, his expensive custom suit rumpled, and his face flushed a deep, dangerous red. Patricia marched right behind him, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon, her eyes darting around the modern office space. They had clearly just fled the disastrous deposition after realizing the FBI was heavily involved. The federal government was officially closing in, and my parents were backed into a desperate, frantic corner. Where is the managing partner? My father bellowed, his voice echoing off the sleek glass walls and interrupting dozens of working professionals. I demand to see the head of this firm right now. Evelyn, a woman who had built her entire forensic accounting empire by taking down corrupt hedge fund managers and untangling international money laundering rings, stepped out of her corner executive suite. She did not flinch at the shouting. She simply crossed her arms, adjusted her glasses, and stared at my father with absolute chilling disdain. "You are trespassing in a secure financial facility," Evelyn stated, her voice dangerously calm and authoritative. "Give me one good reason why I should not have building security throw you out onto the pavement." Richard puffed out his chest, attempting to use the same corporate intimidation tactics that worked on his wealthy country club cronies. "I am Richard Vance, CEO of the Hope Foundation. Your employee Melanie is my daughter. She is severely mentally unstable and she is currently stealing highly confidential client data from your firm to fuel her paranoid delusions. She is a massive liability to your business. Fire her immediately, confiscate her physical files, hand them over to me, and I will personally place your firm on a $500,000 annual retainer." Evelyn looked at him, then looked at me, standing quietly down the hall. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through my father's arrogance like a knife. "You want to bribe a federal forensic accounting firm to fire their top auditor?" Evelyn asked, stepping right into my father's personal space. "Melanie is the one who uncovered a multi-million-dollar embezzlement ring last quarter. She is the most brilliant financial mind in this entire building. I do not care about your charity. I do not care about your dirty money. And if you do not leave my firm this exact second, I am calling the police to have you arrested for attempted corporate bribery." My father's face turned a violent shade of purple. He was a man who had never been told no by a woman in his entire life. He looked around wildly, realizing his money and his status had absolutely no power here. Pure panic finally eclipsed his arrogance. He locked eyes with Patricia, giving her a desperate, frantic nod. Before Evelyn could pick up the phone, Richard lunged toward the wall near the emergency exit. He grabbed the red handle of the commercial fire alarm and yanked it down hard. Deafening sirens instantly ripped through the building. Piercing white strobe lights flashed violently from the ceiling. The entire office erupted into pure chaos. Junior accountants dropped their files and rushed toward the stairwells. Evelyn shouted orders over the blaring noise, trying to corral the staff toward the designated emergency exits. The sheer volume of the alarm made it impossible to think or communicate. But I did not run to the stairs. I knew exactly what my father was doing. He was creating a massive diversion. I slipped backward through the rushing crowd, pressing myself against the glass partitions, and moved silently down the side corridor toward my private office. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Patricia was frantically tearing through my desk drawers. She was throwing confidential client folders onto the floor, pulling out hanging files, and desperately searching for anything resembling the red ledger I had used to trap them at the deposition. Her expensive designer coat was covered in dust from crawling under my desk to check the locked filing cabinet. Looking for something, I asked, my voice cutting through the wailing fire alarm overhead. Patricia whipped around, gasping sharply. She dropped a handful of manila folders, her chest heaving as she glared at me. The polished upper-class matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. "Give me the original documents, Melanie," she demanded, stepping toward me with her hands balled into tight fists. "You are going to ruin everything. You are going to destroy our family over a stupid, pathetic grudge. You destroyed the family the second you stole from orphans to pay for your high-stakes poker debts in Vegas," I replied evenly, refusing to step back. "You used Brittany to launder the money, you framed Elijah, and you tried to silence me in court. The FBI already has the digital trail. Tearing apart my office will not save you from federal prison." Patricia's face contorted with a hatred so deep and venomous it took my breath away. She closed the distance between us, her eyes wild with pure malice. "You always ruin everything," she hissed, her voice cracking with decades of suppressed rage. "From the moment you were born, you have been a toxic, miserable burden. You are exactly like your miserable biological father." The sirens continued to blare around us, but the room suddenly felt completely silent. My biological father. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. In a fraction of a second, 33 years of lifelong scapegoating made perfect, devastating sense. The blatant, unapologetic favoritism toward Brittany, Richard's utter lack of paternal warmth, Patricia's constant need to belittle my existence and break my spirit. I was not just the black sheep of the family. I was the physical evidence of my mother's infidelity. I was a half-sister, a living, breathing reminder of a dark secret they had buried decades ago. Patricia clamped her hand over her mouth, realizing the massive slip of the tongue she had just made. Her eyes darted around the room, waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to demand answers, scream, or collapse in tears. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at the woman who had spent her entire life punishing me for her own sins. I reached up and pointed to the small circular device mounted directly above my desk. That is not a smoke detector, Patricia. It is a 4K hidden camera, and you just committed felony burglary. Patricia stared at the blinking red light of the camera mounted directly above my desk. The blaring fire alarm howling through the corridors suddenly seemed like background noise compared to the deafening silence inside my office. The realization of what she had just done washed over her face, draining away every ounce of her upper-class arrogance. She dropped the manila folders. They scattered across the commercial carpet like dead leaves. Richard appeared in the doorway, breathless and frantic. He grabbed Patricia by the arm, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen him display. Without another word, they bolted. They fled down the emergency stairwell like common thieves desperate to escape the trap they had walked right into. I did not chase them. I simply locked my office door, secured the footage, and let the authorities deal with their felony burglary. I had a much bigger war to win. By the next morning, my sister realized the legal intimidation tactics had failed, so she decided to burn my life to the ground publicly. I woke up to my phone vibrating violently against my nightstand. Dozens of notifications poured in by the second. I turned on the television, and there was Brittany sitting on the plush beige sofa of a premier national morning talk show. She wore a modest, soft pastel cardigan, her hair pulled back simply, and her makeup expertly applied to make her look exhausted and tear-stained. The chyron flashing across the bottom of the screen read, "Charity under attack by troubled family member." "It breaks my heart to speak about this on television," Brittany sniffled, looking directly into the camera with her eyes brimming with fake tears. "My sister Melanie has been battling severe undiagnosed mental illness for years. We have tried everything as a family to get her professional help. Now her delusions have spiraled completely out of control. She is obsessively targeting our orphan charity, fabricating unhinged conspiracy theories because she feels excluded from our family. We just want her to get psychiatric help before she destroys the Hope Foundation." It was a masterful, devastating performance. She weaponized Patricia's slip of the tongue without ever stating it outright, painting me as the bitter, illegitimate outsider, trying to burn down a noble family, cause out of pure spite. The public retaliation was immediate and merciless. Brittany had successfully flipped the narrative, transforming herself from an embezzler into a persecuted victim. By noon, my professional inbox was a disaster zone. Evelyn, my tough-as-nails boss, called me into her office. She stood by the window, her face grim. 3 of our largest corporate clients had paused their forensic auditing contracts, citing the massive media controversies surrounding my name. Evelyn refused to fire me, but the financial bleeding was real. Then came the physical invasion. News vans blocked the street outside my apartment building. Aggressive reporters shoved microphones at my neighbors, demanding quotes about my supposed mental breakdown. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, a courier slipped a formal legal notice under my apartment door. It was an eviction warning from my landlord, citing the media circus as a violation of the building's quiet enjoyment clause. They were trying to starve me out. They wanted to strip away my livelihood, destroy my reputation, and leave me homeless and discredited before the FBI could finish their investigation. I did not panic. I did not lash out. I opened my laptop and called the senior producer of the exact same morning show Brittany had just manipulated. I pitched my voice to sound quiet, exhausted, and thoroughly defeated. I told the producer that the pressure was simply too much to bear. I said I was ready to come on air, apologize to my family, and explain the root of my mental breakdown to the world. The producer practically salivated over the phone. An exclusive live televised apology from the unhinged sister was absolute ratings gold. They bumped a celebrity chef to book me for a live remote feed the very next morning. I sat in Evelyn's secure boardroom, staring into the high-definition broadcast camera the network had couriered over. The morning show host, a polished woman with a deeply sympathetic smile, introduced my segment to millions of viewers. "We are joined live by Melanie, the sister of Hope Foundation director Brittany Vance," the host said softly. "Melanie, you reached out to us. You asked to come on the show today to issue a public apology regarding the recent very troubling allegations against your family's charity." The floor is yours. I looked directly into the camera lens. I wore a sharp tailored black blazer. My posture was rigid, my expression completely serene. I am here to issue an apology. I said, my voice steady, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. I apologize to the generous donors of the Hope Foundation. I apologize to the orphaned children who desperately relied on those funds. And I apologize because it took me this long to expose the absolute financial rot at the center of my family. The host blinked, her sympathetic smile faltering instantly. Melanie, we agreed you were here to talk about your mental health journey. I am perfectly sane. I fired back, my hands flying across the laptop keyboard out of the camera's view. Let us talk about the truth. I initiated a forced screen share, bypassing the network's standard video feed using a remote backdoor protocol I had embedded into their broadcasting software. The national broadcast abruptly cut away from my face. It was replaced by a massive split-screen display of high-resolution financial documents. On the left side of the screen, I displayed the Hope Foundation's forged federal tax returns with the fraudulent routing numbers and Cayman's shell corporations circled in bright, undeniable red. On the right side of the screen, I displayed a series of authenticated itemized receipts from the Cartier boutique on Michigan Avenue. The purchase dates match the charity wire transfers perfectly. What you are looking at is not a delusion, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute authority over national television. This is concrete proof of grand larceny and wire fraud. My sister went on this exact program yesterday and claimed I am suffering from a severe mental breakdown. But the math tells a very different story. I zoomed in on the signature lines and the bank routing codes, ensuring every viewer at home could see the irrefutable evidence. The host was stammering over her earpiece, desperately yelling at her control room to cut the feed, but my software override held firm. The documents remained broadcast to millions. If I am crazy, I said directly to the camera, delivering the final fatal blow. Why do the serial numbers on these charity checks match her diamond necklace? The broadcast feed went completely black. The network executives had finally managed to override my hostile takeover of their system. But it did not matter. 10 seconds of high-definition proof broadcast to millions of morning show viewers was all it took. I closed my laptop, stood up from the desk, and walked out of the studio boardroom. My phone was already exploding. The client cancellations that had plagued my morning suddenly reversed into frantic apologies and reinstatement requests. The fallout for the Hope Foundation was catastrophic. Within 48 hours, major corporate sponsors pulled their funding. Elite donors demanded immediate audits. The local news ran loop after loop of my split screen, showing the forged tax returns next to Brittany's Cartier receipts. My sister went into total hiding, refusing to leave her penthouse, while Patricia and Richard scrambled to stop the absolute hemorrhage of their social and financial capital. They needed cash, and they needed it immediately. The IRS and the FBI were circling, waiting for the final subpoenas to clear. If Richard could not replace the missing $1.5 million before the federal auditors ripped open the charity ledgers, his entire family was going to federal prison. He did what any desperate, arrogant narcissist would do. He threw a party. Evelyn intercepted the digital invitations and brought them to my desk. Richard was hosting an emergency transparency gala at the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom. Tickets were $10,000 a plate. The objective was to gather their wealthiest, most loyal donors in one room, ply them with expensive champagne, and spin a massive, tearful lie. They were going to claim the charity had been the victim of a sophisticated cyber hack, and that my television stunt was a deep fake generated by a jealous, estranged sibling. I have to be in that room, I told Evelyn, staring at the embossed digital invitation. You are blacklisted, she replied, pulling up a leaked security memo from the event organizers. Richard hired a private security firm. Your face is at every entrance, the loading docks, and the kitchen corridors. They have orders to arrest you for trespassing the second your foot hits the carpet. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. They can ban